From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Barris here on a Monday. I hope you had a good weekend and a safe Halloween. We're back at it this morning, and I think you'll enjoy and possibly learn some things this morning on the program. One of the big stories, a tragic one that's happened over the past week, and we've been following it, of course, was, as you know by now, the fatality on a movie set in New Mexico, on the set of a movie being shot with the star Alec Baldwin. As you know, a weapon being used in a scene there, discharged, fired, killed the director, or rather killed the cinematographer, injured the director, and has raised a lot of questions. There's some new details this morning that we'll go over about some things that they are discovering in the investigation, but obviously a lot of questions. You know, here in Tennessee, in fact, we're going to see even more, but I mean, movies are shot here, and obviously television programs, and I've been involved in some productions in the past, never with weapons, but it raises the question about safety on a set and how something like this can happen. Alec Baldwin broke his silence, I think, and talked a bit about it in an impromptu discussion with reporters over the weekend. And I think he said this is a 1 in a trillion incident or something along those lines, that rare. It has happened before. This has happened. Happening one time is too many. So we're going to get into this, along with just how things are done on a movie set, with an expert this morning to kind of get his thoughts on this occurring and how it can be prevented moving forward and what we know about it all. So you can join in the conversation. We're not only on the Plus this morning, but we're also streaming live on Facebook. So invite you to join in the conversation with comments there. But with us this morning is Richard Gershman. Good morning to you, sir.
Hey, good morning.
It's good to have you on. You are a professor of, I guess, movies and motion pictures, which is a course I would take. You're at Belmont now, and you've got quite a history in the biz. I really appreciate you coming on.
Sure. No, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and I thought we would just give some folks a little bit of a background before we get into the details on that horrible incident on the movie set. But you have a long history, having lived in LA. You live here now and teach, but movies, you know Alec Baldwin. You worked with him on the movie Hunt for Red October years ago, which is a breakthrough, great movie. But give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. So prior to coming out to Nashville to teach, and I came here to teach at Watkins College, which unfortunately folded, and then landed at Belmont a year and a half ago. But I worked in LA for 30 some odd years in television and film, mostly in television. But my jobs were either assistant director, production manager, or director. So I'm a 30-year member of the Directors Guild of America, which is the professional union for all of those positions. So I'm intimately involved with those kind of issues of safety on the set, and that's the subject, of course, we're here to talk about today. And there's a lot of protocols in place. There's actually safety training now that's required, which didn't exist when I first entered the industry. It's taken a while for the film industry to kind of catch up to that. I think part of that is because it's such a freelance industry in terms of how people are employed. They go from job to job to job. So there was no centralized system to say, hey, you need to know these things before you can do this job. And eventually, unfortunately, after various tragedies and lawsuits, the industry decided, yeah, we need to do something. And so now every union member has to go through safety training, and that's required in order to be employed. So that's a great advancement in that area. But there are a lot of protocols. I think, you know, from what's come out in the news so far, there were a number of missteps, unfortunately. And usually it's more than one to cause a tragedy like this.
Well, we're hearing, more coming out every day. And maybe if you would lay out for us, too, you hear the word blank, and you hear the word prop, and then you hear the word gun. It sounds to me like what was on this set was an actual gun, a real gun, not a plastic toy gun or something like this, and one that you know, would be used with a blank. Can you tell me the difference between and how it's decided what's used? Because I think prop guns are used as well sometimes, or fake ones rather.
Yeah. So a gun would be used for various reasons as part of the costuming. So if you have somebody walking around with a gun in a holster, it doesn't need to be functional, but it should look real. sometimes you need a gun where you're going to have a pretty tight close-up on it, and you would see whether there's a bullet in the chamber or not. So you have to have something to put in there, and that's what's called a dummy.
Okay.
And then finally, a blank is something that actually has gunpowder in it, has no projectile. The gunpowder is kept in there by a piece of plastic, a piece of paper, or something, which the paper would evaporate. But that's so that there is something coming out of the barrel when you shoot.
Okay. And obviously you don't see the round coming out. Now,
Right.
can that unto itself be dangerous
Yes.
if you're close, at least the discharge right at the end of the barrel?
Yeah, there was a famous, you were talking about other previous accents, there was a famous story about an actor named John Hexum, I think it was in the 80s. Actually, it happened on 20th Century Fox a lot, on the same stage I ended up working on when I started my career in the late 80s. And for some reason he had the prop gun in his hand after shooting and was fooling around, put the gun to his head, and pulled the trigger, and it was a blank, but it was enough of a projectile to end up causing his death.
There's still some that comes out. And of
Yeah.
course, another case that's been referenced after this case happened in Santa Fe was the Raven, the movie The Raven. Was
Right.
that it? Bruce Lee's son.
Lee, yeah.
And was that a case too, like this one, where an actual round was fired from a weapon, I believe?
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I think it was a live round.
Okay.
And that's one of the biggest mistakes. There's no reason ever to have a live round on a set, period. You just don't use it. I mean, if you think about it, a live round is meant to pierce something, and there's no reason or desire to do that when you're filming. All of the reactions, the shots of a bullet hitting something are almost always done with what they call with squib hits or pyrotechnics, where you put a small charge on an object like a car or a wall or whatever, and it's controlled by a special effects person, and they make the little explosion go off, and that looks like a bullet hit it.
Right.
It's much safer to do it that way than actually have a projectile flying through the air, especially when it's near people. So that's one of the basic rules, is no live rounds on set.
Okay. All right. Now and I want to get more into that,
Yeah.
but I want to ask you just a bit about Alec Baldwin. And I know it's probably been some years since you've had contact with him. You've worked with him on a film, really at the beginning, where he became a big star with Hunt for Red October. But I mean, this is a very experienced actor.
Yeah.
And maybe you can talk to me about the role. I mean, Alec Baldwin's been taking some criticism here, fairly or unfairly, for what happened here. But if you're a big-time actor like he has been on a lot of big-budget films, even though this one, I mean, from what I understand, was not a real big-budget film,
Right.
but he should, and he was told, I think, didn't the assistant director or the armorer say something like this gun's safe, or it's a cold gun, or something
Right.
like that?
Yeah.
Would there have been any reason for Alec Baldwin to think anything other than this is a safe weapon to be pulling the trigger on, or was there some responsibility on his part?
So let me tell you what the steps are normally. You know, when you bring a gun on the set, and to some extent, I mean, it's maybe a small percentage of his attention to that was missed in this case, but I must say, overall, if he was told that this is a cold gun, meaning there's nothing in it, it's empty, and especially they're doing a Western, so this is going on day after day, you know, multiple times a day,
right,
that it's easier to just accept what you're told in that case. And I'm sure he had no idea, as he has said, that there was a live round in there. So normally what would happen is you'd have an armorer, especially in a Western where you're handling guns every single day and all the time, that sole job is to handle firearms. And they're going to bring that gun to the set, they're going to open it and show the assistant director actually that there's nothing in there. And then at that point, they hand it to the actor. They do the filming. When the filming's done, the actor hands it back to the prop person or the armorer.
Okay.
In the case of where they're going to put something in there, whether it's a dummy or live round,
right,
that's a second step. After you see that it's empty, then they show you that they're putting that in there.
And by the way, I want you to finish your thought there, but do dummy rounds resemble live rounds in any way, or can you pretty much tell by looking at the two which is which?
So if you look at it really close, you can tell, but to the camera, you're not going to be able to see. I think it's crimped on the side, but basically it's a bullet without any gunpowder in it.
Okay.
So it can't go off.
Okay.
But it looks from the outside.
Same thing with a blank?
No, blank actually has gunpowder.
Okay, but does it look the same? I'm just wondering, I would think the bullet end would not be the actual bullet. It would be the round, but no bullet to fire out of it.
So it doesn't look the same, and that's why there are two
Okay, so it's not
elements.
like, you know, it's real hard to tell the difference. I mean, if you're an armorer, you should know pretty clearly whether or not there's a real live bullet in there or a dummy or a blank.
No, absolutely, yeah. And so apparently this gun was left on a cart near the set, and the AD, who really shouldn't handle the firearm or touch it at all, picked it up, announced that it was a cold gun, and handed it to Alec Baldwin. At least that's what's been reported. And so there were mistakes made in all those areas. There should never have been a live round and set to start with. I don't know where the armorer was, but she should have been there when any firearms are being handled. The AD should not have touched it. Obviously, you shouldn't announce that unless he actually saw the evidence, and you do that every single time for that very reason.
For every single
time the gun is put in front of the camera or handed to an actor, every single time you need to do that.
And when you think truly about the thousands and thousands of movies made over the years involving weapons, what comes back to me is the Clint Eastwood movies, the Dirty Harry and Magnum Force. I mean, a big gun being pointed at people and that, I mean, it's very, very rare that something like this happens.
Yes,
so the protocols are in place.
Right.
But so you're saying, and we'll go to a break on this note, that clearly some very, very bad things were done here in terms of following protocol.
Yeah, they were, and sometimes it's the nature of the production. It's a low budget, which means the staffing may be in short supply in certain areas. Maybe this armor had to do something else, which he shouldn't be pulled away.
Right.
Sometimes with a lot of guns in a Western, you would imagine would be a lot of guns. There should be two people in that crew, not just one person.
Sure.
So there were corners cut, and unfortunately, I think that probably added to the problem as well. I heard there was like a $7 or $8 million budget for this, which is fairly low.
That is, right.
So for something like this.
May not have had the staffing. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. We can look at some of the comments and questions on Facebook if you're following us at newschannel5.com, or you can call us 737-7587. When we come back to you, I've got some of the very latest developments out of there right now. Some allegations that actually during breaks they were taking these guns with live rounds and doing target practice somewhere there in the desert. It's like, okay, now we begin to understand how this might have happened. We'll be back with more in our conversation with Professor Richard Gershman right after this. Stay with us.